If the truth feels slippery, it's because it's being twisted. And today we're exposing exactly how cheaters distort reality to stay in control and to keep you confused. It's time to break it all the way down. Welcome to the Couples Academy Show. My name is Asani.
I'm Danielle.
And make sure you tune in all week long because we're going to be unpacking this concept that we introduced on yesterday called the cube of deception and the way in which people lie in the recovery process because they've already been exposed and they're trying to protect their image, protect the affair, protect their affair partner. And in that process, they engage in all types of deception.
For sure. And also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. This is how you're going to never miss a show. And let's make sure we spread this message all around the globe. Could you make sure you do that right now? Go ahead and like, share, and subscribe. Thank you so much. Also, when you come on, let us know that you're here. Just make sure that you tell us where you're coming in from, who you are, and we will definitely acknowledge your comments today.
All right, so today we're talking about distortion of truth. Now, the 6 sides of deception we unpacked it on yesterday. The first obvious side would be lying. Now, I don't think we need a whole course on lying. We've been experiencing it all of our lives. Either we've been on the front end or the back end of it. So it's a quite obvious behavior that we can identify. So that will be the first side of deception. Today, we're stepping into the second side, the distortion of truth, the mind games that keep people confused. And to give you a definition, here we go. Distortion of truth is the deliberate reshaping. That's what I want you to look at. The deliberate reshaping or reinterpreting of facts to create confusion, to avoid accountability, and influence how reality is perceived. It doesn't deny what happens. It bends it just enough to protect the deceiver and to destabilize the one seeking answers. That's a deep definition because it seems a lot more intentional.
It sounds like, is this a psychopath that we're dealing with here? Like, whose motivation is to distort the truth when you consider this definition? Very intentional, very conniving. And like, I'm definitely trying to manipulate and take something from this relationship that I'm absolutely not willing to give. So now, I mean, just hearing that would put me on alarm. It would make me think, okay, I've got to protect myself against somebody like this.
And I think that's where a lot of people wind up. Like in their relationship, they enter into a place of self-protection, self-preservation, and it's not a good thing. The fact that you have to protect yourself from your partner, it means that things are getting progressively worse, and there's a huge emotional disconnect. Walls are built up, and it's
Sure.
hard to penetrate through those walls when one continues to deceive and one continues to protect oneself.
And I think people can easily judge the situation and think, well, just leave that. Why would you be in a relationship with that? But, we get entangled in our relationships in many different ways. It's not as easy as people think to leave. And it's easy to judge when you've not been in that circumstance, right? So, I mean, people having families and homes and, all kinds of responsibilities tied into a person, that's one thing. But then also the fact that we're talking about distortion of truth. And so it takes us into this questioning mind. Am I crazy? Is this happening? People on the outside looking in see one thing, you're looking out from the inside, you see another thing, and you're trying to make sense of all of this.
Absolutely, Danielle. And I think that many people experience it, whether there's been an affair in a relationship or not. Even though we focus on those who've gone through betrayal, these are added behaviors and attitudes and postures that people take in relationships in general. So let's break down this distortion of truth, because even though it's one face of deception, it has many different components to it. Now, one of the things that we've heard about, it's been very popular in the culture today because it's been talked about, is this whole concept of gaslighting. This is a form of distortion of the facts, if you will. And what happens is it will leave a person questioning their memory, questioning their perception, questioning
Yeah.
their own sanity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's done in such a way that makes a person think that they're crazy. And, something will happen and a person will say, I never did that. A person will say something and then they'll respond and say, I never said that. It never happened. And so the effect is that you start second guessing, well, did that really happen to me?
Mhm.
Am I really crazy? And so we go into complete denial if we've been unfaithful because we don't want to be further exposed. And gaslighting is a huge thing because, yes, it absolutely distorts the fact. And with gaslighting, what happens is you wind up shifting blame. Like you're turning the focus back on the victim. They're complaining about something you've done, and you're flipping it and putting it back on them, making them feel responsible for the problem or the behavior in the first place.
I think gaslighting is first of all, it's become just as popular as somebody saying that he's a narcissist or she's a narcissist, right?
Yes.
Like everybody talks about gaslighting now, so you hear it because there are so many components of it. Like one of the things that stands out to me is just the fact that it erodes the trust that you have with the person, because ultimately, as you were saying, it makes you question your memory. It makes you question your judgment on things, your perception of past or future events, over time. And all the second guessing that takes place and everything causes you to lose trust in your own decision making, right? You don't even know if your instincts are correct anymore. And that's the crazy making that takes place. I think the scariest thing is just the fact that somebody would be intentionally doing this, like this is part of their master plan to deceive, is to gaslight you, And another thing that stands out to me is just how in gaslighting, oftentimes the person will try to isolate you by causing you to second guess relationships with friends, relationships with your
Mm.
family, the intentions of these people. They don't really like you. They just tolerate you. Little seeds are planted to cause insecurities in the person, to cause them to withdraw. And the more you withdraw, the more they've got you in their hands.
What you're saying is absolutely true, Danielle. And like the impact of gaslighting, it doesn't just distort the truth, it literally distorts you. Just a few statements that are common to someone who gaslights would be, you're twisting what happened. That's not how it went. Or you'll always hear what you want to hear, regardless of what I say. You're so sensitive. If you weren't always nagging me, this wouldn't have happened. You're overreacting. You're being paranoid, right? Being loving one moment and then cold the next. Those are some of the behaviors of a person who's a gaslighter, and it can feel very isolating. It's going back to the statement I made yesterday. It's literally psychological and emotional
For
abuse.
sure, for sure. And I think let's balance this a little bit, because a lot of the statements that you said, people say in conversation and in arguments, and you know, and there could be it could be valid, some of those statements that are being said. These could be real issues in the relationship, not someone just gaslighting you. But this is a symptom that you could look for, right? If you start to see some of these other issues showing up all together, you might start to say, hey, am I being gaslit? Is this person trying to distort the reality on me? But I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I don't want people to think that if these statements are said in your home, this is a gaslighter. That's not necessarily the case. But we need to be able to identify when people are communicating with us if this is manipulation. It's just that simple. Right? Is this person manipulating me, or are they actually pointing out something that's true? And that's where honesty comes into play, because I mean, a lot of times in discussing things and when we have arguments and are discussing serious issues, there's a lot of denial about what's going on. And some of these things do need to be pointed out, but we need to understand all of the other signs so that we could make, some kind of a logical decision about what's going on.
And I want to be clear when it comes to this, like these behaviors we're identifying, the person who's engaging in the behaviors isn't always consciously aware of what they're doing. Right? A
Facts.
lot of times they have to come into the knowledge of what they're doing. Like, you're gaslighting. No, I'm not. What does that even mean? I've never even heard of what is that? So it's not like I'm intentionally trying to do this for the purpose of controlling or distorting you, but that in essence is what you're doing. And so that's why it's important that self-awareness, self-assessment, removing ego and truly being able to look at things for what they are important if you're going to change and go through an experience of transformation. We have a comment I want to a reference from Renee. She says, when unfaithful, being as honest as possible is answering questions is a super vital step to recovery. Trickle truth and gaslighting only hurts the betrayed more than the truth ever could. And that's a fact. Like the lie hurts more than the truth. We say this all the time. The truth hurts, but the truth also heals. But when you lie and deceive, there's no healing that comes from that. It just keeps you in that hurt. Frank also made a statement, said, the unfaithful told me that I put it in my head and that the other person lives in my head because I want them to. Well, listen,
Wow.
there's truth, but that's true, but that could be said in a manipulative way. That person is in your head, and it's hard to get that person out of your head, and that's one of the challenges that the betrayed spouse has to go through in their healing, right? There's things that the unfaithful partner did to get that person trapped, and now the journey of your healing is to remove them from your head, to remove them from your heart. And so this is why this is something that is difficult to do on your own. You need somebody guiding you through a process to help you get to your best self and to help you two as a couple get through it. But I can see how that statement could be said in a very insensitive way.
Exactly. And I could see how that statement could be said in a gaslighting way as well, because, even though if this person is in your head, they put them there, right? Because of their infidelity. And we don't know the magnitude of how much they're in your head, or are you still concerned about behaviors that you're seeing that are showing you that this person is still around? So that's the manipulation part of it. It's just like, you don't get to bring a situation into my life and then cause me to feel like I'm the broken one or I'm the crazy one because you broke me or you brought this to my world. And that's a lot of what happens with gaslighting. It's like, when do you take responsibility for the actions that you did that put this idea, these emotions, these feelings, this experience in my head? And so you might be onto something. So, tune into some of these other characteristics, because it's almost like with people who we consider to be narcissistic. Once you catch them out there and make them aware of their behavior, they do start to try to move a little bit differently. Like it's almost like you were covert, but now you're exposed. And we oftentimes have to learn about what's going on so that we have clarity and understanding so that we can expose it. I don't have to prove anything. If I understand what gaslighting is and you don't, and I approach my spouse and I say, hey, here's what you did. This is what's going on. And this is what gaslighting is. Let me educate you. Now you've exposed the person's behavior. It is empowering. When you expose that behavior and know what's happening to you, that should increase your confidence. You know what I'm saying? So we have to take authority over how people are treating us. And I say this all the time. We need to teach people how to treat us. And we can't do that by staying in the dark and staying ignorant about how people are behaving.
Absolutely. All right, let's go to the second component of the distortion of truth, Danielle.
So, the next thing is exaggeration, right? So now Hassan and I talk about exaggeration all the time. So it's so ironic that we're talking about this. But as it relates to, this manipulative distortion of the truth, exaggeration is a huge problem. This is when you are amplifying marital problems, right? So this is when, something is as small as an anthill always becomes a molehill, right? So you're making a bigger deal out of it, making common relationship challenge sound extreme to shift focus away from the affair or whatever issue that you're having, right? Also, this can be when we decide we're going to just rewrite history, right? So we're going to pretend that what happened in the past never happened. We're going to retell the story of the relationship through a negative lens that aligns with the narrative of whatever the dissatisfaction is, right? So as we're reading this, I want you to think through, like, has this happened? And as I'm reading this, I'm also thinking about how gaslighting can hold hands with this issue. And a third way would be victim mentality framing, right? And so positioning yourself as a longtime suffering spouse who is focused on the affair or the issue because of these unbearable conditions. And so what I want you to think about when it comes to the hand-holding of exaggeration to the whole idea of what was the first thing? Gaslighting. If you are someone who has experienced things and you're talking about these things and the gaslighter is saying you're exaggerating, right? Like these things never happened. Those things are just in your mind. This is your imagination. That's how the gaslighter can actually manipulate how you're behaving. But also a gaslighter can exaggerate, right? And so now they're turning the table and they're the ones exaggerating. But it could be about how you behave or how you show up or what you are or what you're not or how you used to be, but you've fallen off. It's ultimately a grand plan to tear down the person, keep them from understanding who they are, their worth, their value, manipulate in order to control.
I think you're right how these two actually hold hands with one another. A term I use all the time is they're clustered together, right?
Yes.
Where one ends, the other begins. Because if the gaslighter shifts focus, the exaggerator maximizes or magnifies the quote unquote problems that existed in the relationship. And the fact of the matter is, yes, problems probably did exist in the relationship,
Mm-hmm.
but that is focused on to justify one's affair. For instance, a person who says, well, we were basically just roommates. Okay. We
Mm-hmm.
haven't had a real relationship in years. You stop supporting me emotionally. You never support me, or you always, whatever it was.
Using
So
absolutes.
using absolutes, using exaggerations, and of course, in every exaggeration, there is an element of the truth. But what happens is with this type of betrayer, a lot of times they don't take personal accountability. They don't fess up and say, well, the reason why I did what I did is because of things that were going on in me. What they're doing is they're pointing the finger at their partner and making them the blame. And I think that that's one of the biggest things that's hurtful for the betrayed partner. So now it
Mm.
becomes a narrative. Oh, so I'm the reason why you cheated. So it
Right.
wasn't what I was doing.
Right.
And so oftentimes the betrayed
Mhm.
person takes on all of this self-blame. Like we call it the shifting of blame shifting, where first, as the betrayed spouse, I blame you, then I blame me, then I blame the affair partner, then I wind up blaming me again. So I'm always asking questions and always bringing up statements subconsciously that make me responsible for what you did because of the tactics and the strategies that the unfaithful partner uses in this discovery process. And it's extremely damaging because it will leave me feeling like I've got to fix me for you to stop cheating because you never took responsibility. So this
Mm.
victim mentality framing where you're positioning yourself as the victim. So because I was victimized in this relationship, I was forced into the affair. And it is so damaging.
Right. For
And
sure.
this is why we say that the betrayal deepens after the discovery of the betrayal than what actually happens itself. There's more hurt that comes along
Yeah,
with
because there's a season where, when the discovery takes place, where the person is trying to validate or justify this long-term deceptive behavior, right? And so that's why the betrayal deepens, because you're not ready to just give it all up and be transparent, cleanse yourself of all the lies. You're still reaching for straws, trying to grasp something that would justify your behavior. You're rewriting the history,
yeah.
and it's like, as to your point, if somebody is, caught red-handed and you've all along had your justifications for your infidelity and for your betrayal and your behavior. You had to, because you're human. So the entire time you had to have created a narrative that begin from the very beginning. You know what? Bump this. You know what? They don't appreciate me. I'm going over here where I'm appreciated. That's number one, right? So you've already started to web this lie of deception to yourself. And that is the huge piece of it. You're not just lying to the person that you're betraying. You have your own web of lies that you've told yourself that allows you to get up every day, iron your shirt, put it on, get dressed, spritz some perfume on you, and go out in the streets and be deceptive and betray your family, betray your vow, betray your covenant. You had to have been telling yourself a lie. So now that you're caught red-handed, it's more than just the details of the affair. It's now we've got to dismantle the mental construct that you've built that allows you to get up every day and go lie. You know, they tell themselves things like, they never supported me emotionally anyway. I had no support in the first place, you know, or there was never any passion in the relationship, right? So there's all these things, all these ideas that we create. Another point when it comes to exaggeration is the overgeneralization of the situation. So using these broad sweeping statements to oversimplify complex relationship issues. So like you always shut me down, you know, you never listen to me. Again, with the absolutes, all of these things build the case that justify your deceptive behavior. And this is hard talk, what we're doing right here, because, you know, of course, the offended person is going to be in the amen corner, but it takes putting on your big girl panties and your big boy trunks or shorts to acknowledge that, yeah, I have been telling myself a lie in order for me to cope with my own demons on the inside. Because let me tell you something, every human being on the planet who has a soul wakes up in the morning and has some conversation going on about how you show up in the world. And if you are really good at self-deception, you will hear those conversations and push them to the back of the room of your mental so that you can continue to do what you know is not right.
Facts. You said that so perfectly. I just want to end this point on exaggeration by saying that it makes the betrayal sound justified, but no matter how difficult the relationship was, infidelity is a choice, not a consequence. Period. Point blank. Okay. Let's go into the third point, minimization. Now, this is the opposite of exaggeration. And oftentimes I'm always course correcting couples in counseling sessions. And I'm like, please don't say that. It sounds very minimizing. And when you do that, it really impacts your spouse and it's an insult to their intelligence. Please be careful with the words you use, the phraseology, because it's only going to make matters worse. And minimization really is the act of downplaying the seriousness, downplaying the scope or the emotional impact of the affair. And what it's done really is they're trying to reduce accountability. They're trying to soften the blow. They're trying to change how the betrayed partner sees the offense. Because if I can downplay the severity of it and make it come across meaningless or insignificant or casual, it was no big deal. It was just texting. We only kissed. When we do that, it is a strategy. We talk about lies are more than statements, but they're strategies. And the strategy here is to get you to not feel the impact of the devastating behavior that I caused in your life. Now, when it comes to exaggeration, what?
Go ahead.
The minimization, what it also does is it trivializes really the emotional or sexual connection that was shared between two people. You know, treating emotional or sexual intimacy with the affair as unimportant. But everything that you did had some significance.
Hassani, I mean, I just don't want you to move too fast past this, because the minimizing is such a huge issue. I don't think it gets enough attention. I don't think that it's talked about enough. Trivializing something that is a major traumatic event for somebody that you say that you care about. And I've heard so many versions of this behavior. One of the biggest ones I hear is, trivializing emotional affairs in comparison to actual sexual contact affairs. Not understanding the impact of giving your heart away as if it is not as significant as giving your body away. I mean, most relationships you encounter, the person that you're married to gave their body away several times before you got there. But the heart is huge. The heart is where the covenant is made. right? And so I think, this trivializing is a huge thing, because it creates this environment where you never feel that you got justice. If you can't understand the impact of your behavior, that it was just as detrimental to the person that you care about as something else that may be more major to someone else. Like, if you can't sit down and say, okay, how did this impact you, and see that hurt on that person, they're never going to feel validated. They're never going to feel that they got the justice that they need to move forward freely. And I say this a lot, we are required to forgive, but the person that did the hurting actually holds the key to unlock forgiveness for somebody who's willing. It's so much easier when the person that did the offending acknowledges, not minimizes. I mean, you're better off exaggerating what you did, right, to the person, so that you can unlock the iceberg of hurt and pain beneath. Once that thing is melted, then you could get rid of all the other things. But it's just really difficult to move forward with somebody who minimizes extreme things, justifying the behavior because it wasn't as bad as what somebody else did, or other examples like that.
Let me piggyback on what you just said. It would be better to exaggerate what you did. So think about a telescope, or think about binoculars. You have the ability to focus in to make the image larger, or to focus out and to make the image smaller. And what happens is, when you, as the unfaithful partner, minimize what has happened, you're forcing your spouse to maximize what has happened. So, to your point, it is better to maximize it. It is better to take accountability. I'd rather you beat yourself up over what you did than beat your spouse up over
Yeah,
what
and
you did.
right. And let me stop you. Like, if I'm the hurt person, let me say, okay, it's enough. I forgive you. You don't have to bring this up every day anymore. Let the hurt person say that. Don't you minimize and take away from the magnitude of the effect
Yeah.
of what you did. And
Yeah.
and just to tie this up with a nice little bow, we talk about infidelity. And so that's huge, right? For most people, that's the pinnacle of offense. It's really not, but in most people's minds, they think it is until they've experienced it. But there are other little mini micro things that people minimize, right, that are just as detrimental to the person. Think about a security-based or a security-minded person who finds out that their spouse spent every dime and they are broke. That is major, major stuff. Well, I was trying to win big. I gambled it away. I thought we were going to be more wealthy. I mean, this is what I'm talking about. Minimizing things because if, in comparison to what somebody else is going through, it may not seem like a big deal to that person, but the one that's experiencing the offense, it could mean the world to them. It could be crushing and devastating to them. So it's really about hearing the heart of your spouse and understanding and having a posture to support them in what they're going through.
Absolutely. Let me just say, minimizing doesn't reduce the damage, it increases it. And if you want your spouse to heal, if you want you to heal and your marriage to heal, you got to be honest, you got to be truthful, and you got to deal with what is. Because the more you minimize it, you don't even, it's almost like you don't see it as a defense. In your mind, it was not that big a deal, which will then plant a seed within your own subconscious mind that if you do it again, it's really not a big deal. You have to have such a hatred and a disdain for what you did that you would never consider doing this thing again. But a posture of minimizing does not do that. It'll just lead to the next affair. And I'm not putting that on people. I'm just saying the psychology of it is not helpful. Danielle, let's go to the fourth aspect of this face of distortion of truth.
I was just going to say, to your point on the minimizing, like, if you have not been able to recognize that what you've done was devastating, again, it's really a full stop. It's very difficult for you to move forward with the person that you say you want to move forward with. I think that's a struggle for people because they're not realizing that that little thing, like everything else is moving forward. We're working with you as a couple. Hassani's got the husband, Danielle's got the wives, but then there's this issue between you that you won't give up because you keep minimizing. And you do say it a lot, like, please don't minimize, please don't minimize. We try to instruct our couples not to do that because of how heavy and weighty it is. It literally depletes the energy from the relationship when you still have not really fully acknowledged what you did. And that goes into justification, which is the last one. And I'll just read the definition. Justification is the act of offering reasons or excuses for the affair that shift responsibility away from the unfaithful partner and making the betrayal seem reasonable, understandable, or even deserved. This is the craziness that goes on. And listen, y'all, not to throw you under the bus and call you crazy. That's not what we're doing. We understand that there's an ignorance here, and you didn't understand that these were the major issues. There's a scripture that talks about it's the small, what is it? The small foxes that spoil the vines, or is it something like that? The small foxes that spoil the vines. Yes. And it's just pointing out little things. It's little things. The big thing was you cheated. The big thing was you stole. The big thing was that, you gave your heart away to somebody. But it's these little things, like now that we've decided to move forward together, you're still justifying what you did. That is huge. We've got to put that behind us. So the core components of justification is blaming the relationship. This is probably the biggest thing that we hear, right? Is that, well, they point to the unmet needs, or dissatisfaction in the marriage as for the reason for the affair or the infidelity or whatever the betrayal was. There was a reason. I didn't just get here. This is what it said. I didn't just come to this by myself. There were reasons. And we make these examples that, I wasn't getting what I needed at home. Or, we haven't had sex for months. These are real relationship issues. Yes. But there is no justification for deception. Think about that. What justification can you really give for deception? Wouldn't you be better off being honest with your spouse and saying, hey, this isn't working. I don't like this. And these are the thoughts that I'm having. Most people that I talk to would say, I would have preferred that. Because you know what I would have said? I don't like this either. What can we do about it? But you stepping out and being deceptive is huge. Blaming the betrayal partner is another one. Highlighting other issues that the spouse has, flaws and other actions and things that they do. And there's validity to that. And those are things that we get to when we're working with clients. We get to all the things that were definitely in the relationship, that were definitely problems, that definitely frustrated you. Okay. But that's not the reason for your deception. The reason for your deception is that you were deceptive, is that you wanted what you wanted and you did what you did because you wanted to. And you created the web of lies that made sense to you why you would go do something detrimental to your own life. It's never the spouse's fault. But this is what we tell ourselves in rationalizing our bad behavior. Mm-hmm. You were always cold and distant. You never made me feel appreciated. Mm-hmm. Right? These are big ones that we hear talked about a lot.
Daniel, I think that the one of the biggest issues that I run across when dealing with couples is how this justification, what it really does is it minimizes moral responsibility. I think that's a huge thing, because if you can make this thing seem like, an understandable mistake rather than a conscious violation of trust, mm-hmm. I think you have a problem on your hand. I think the betrayed spouse begins to believe the former unfaithful spouse when they start to operate in integrity, when they begin to operate by a moral compass, when they develop a stronger relationship with God. Because when that happens, there's no longer the blurring of lines between right and wrong. It's almost like there's a moral clarity that takes place. And I think oftentimes the justifier has a distorted way of thinking, and there is no, the lines are blurred. And if the lines are blurred, then you don't know when you've crossed the line. And I think that's also a part of the damage that's being done in the justification.
Facts. And I want to read this comment from Greg saying, it seems emotional versus physical affairs are always compared when it's both. I think all the elementary of betrayal feed off of each other. I mean, there's some truth to that, if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, that basically, I mean, it's, you know, one does feed the other. The deficit of emotional connection can feed the deficit of physical connection. So this is how we rationalize
Mhm.
stepping out and having an affair. But we have to acknowledge that you can't rationalize. Can you rationalize murder? You know, can you rationalize, you know, I don't know, what are some of the worst things out here that people do? Can you rationalize anything that's not supposed to be done? I mean, I guess you can, but that doesn't make it right.
Yeah.
That's the point. And I think when it comes to how we rationalize with our spouses, when we're trying to repair things, that's when it becomes a problem. If you go off and do something on your own and you say, hey, I did this, it's over. You can rationalize all you want out there in the streets, because that's what you're going to do. You're going to rationalize, you're going to justify your behavior to friends and family, because you're going to make excuses for why you're no longer with your spouse. Well, he didn't do this and he stopped doing that, and I was missing this. And all your friends and family are going to empathize and sympathize with you. But when you are trying to repair the relationship, all of that mess has to go out of the window. You have to stop the rationalizing and justifying, and you have to own the facts of what's happened on both sides. So going back to your point, whatever was missing has to get addressed too. Whatever was lacking in the relationship has to get worked on too. But we have to stop justifying our bad behavior when we want to repair. And let's really park it on that. If you want the relationship, you have to start to do things differently, think differently than you were thinking before. The rationalization, the justification is what got you here. You can't continue in the same relationship, continuing to speak like that, think like that, act like that. None of that can stay in the relationship if you want to repair and if you want to move forward.
Well, let me just jump in, because first of all, everything you said, 1000% correct. I absolutely agree. The way I read that statement, matter of fact, we'll put it up here. When he talks about the difference between emotional and physical affairs, how they're being compared. Some people say the physical affair is worse. Some people say the emotional affair is worse. And so here's the question: what's worse, stolen love or forbidden sex? Stolen love represents the heart. Forbidden sex represents the body. Well, it depends on who you're married to, because it depends, and I think that's the problem. The impact for every person is going to be different. We've been in sessions where a person says, "Man, you gave them your heart." If you gave them your body, I could understand that, but the fact that you gave them your heart makes it worse. So for them, emotional affairs are worse. Then we've heard, you know what? You gave them your heart, cool, but your body, you actually had sex with the person and you violated our covenant through physical exchange. There's nothing worse than that, because you let another person inside of you, or you placed yourself inside another person, and that is devastating. So the point is, both of them are bad. Both of them have a traumatic impact on the person, on you, on the relationship, because they represent a form of betrayal. And betrayal is choosing a selective other that is not you. So no matter how it unpacks, manifests, it's all significantly damaging. Does
Let's
it?
go to another component of justification, which would be emotional framing. Okay. And so this is just another component of how you might justify, and that's using pain and loneliness or personal struggles as a defense for having this affair. Right. So that might look like, you know, oh, I was in such a dark place at the time. I didn't know what else to do. I felt invisible in this relationship. I don't feel like I mattered to you. You were so busy and involved, and I was left alone. Right. So it's like I was in such a bad emotional state. That's why I cheated on you. And again, some of these things actually happened in the relationship. The problem is that we begin to hold on to these things and use these things as a valid justification. And one thing that I try to do, because sometimes I hear them come up in sessions like, you know, here's that justification again. And I want to literally pry that justification out of your hands and give you a mindset reset to let you understand that you can no longer use that as ammunition. You being in a broken place is not a justification for your poor behavior. So justification does a lot of really negative things to the betrayed partner. It creates guilt and self-blame, right? It causes the person to start to wonder, wow, like, okay, I wasn't here for this. I wasn't that. Me. Is this affair my fault?
Mm.
Does it not do that? When we justify, well, if it wasn't for this, I wouldn't have done that. If it wasn't for you, like all you're doing is pointing the finger with justifications. So depending on the person, if they're hearing that, feeling that, being gaslit into a mindset shift, they might actually question, maybe this is my fault.
Mm-hmm.
It blurs the lines of what's right and what's wrong, because the moral clarity of the betrayal gets clouded by emotional reasoning, right? And I've seen this play out. Like, can't you understand how I was feeling at that time? We had this go on, we had that go on, and I was in just such a bad place. Don't you understand? And so now it's like you're seeking empathy from your victim.
Just think about that for a second, right? You're absolutely right, and it's interesting, Danielle, because if a couple is to truly heal, you've got to get to a place where it's not about what you did to me or I did to you, but this is what we experienced. So you eventually want to get to that place, but in the initial part of the recovery process, what you just said is exactly what people do, and it's damaging. And I think that motive and intent have a lot to do with this. When your motive is manipulative, something that you're doing could land very wrong and do more damage. When you're going through this is why we say the order and the steps that you go through are important. There have been people who have attempted to restore their relationship on their own because they watch our podcast, they bought our books, and they've done the right things in the wrong order or with the wrong motive or in the wrong way, and it makes things worse. And then they wind up coming back and saying, we don't know what we're doing. We need your guidance. Because you do want empathy on both sides, but as you're framing it, that's the manipulative way that people seek that out, which is damaging.
Facts. I mean, at the end of the day, death by 1,000 cuts is still death. And so I can't implore you, but I only cut you a little bit 1,000 times. I was gentle with the cuts. Death by 1,000 cuts is still death. And so, no, we don't get to justify how we injure our victims. All we get to do is own them. And if we don't do that, if you've sliced me 1,000 times and somehow I'm still living, somehow I'm still holding on to life, if you want healing to take place, if you want to know what the healing balm is, it is accepting and acknowledging the damage that you've done. And by withholding that from the betrayed partner, it literally undermines the healing. It creates an environment where I can never really patch up these wounds, because every time a conversation comes up about it, whatever was scabbing over gets ripped off. Okay. So
No, I'm sorry, Danielle. You're making some incredible points. There's some comments in here I definitely want to get to really quickly. Greg, I need you to re-ask this question. You said when the betrayal is from the wife and the betrayal is the husband in therapy, do they still separate according to husband/wife? I need you to clarify that statement. I don't know what that means, but I want to answer the question. While you're doing that, I want to jump to Frank. Frank said, how do I deal with being told that I need professional help, but the unfaithful is convinced that they are perfectly fine in the mind? And that this is a major problem, Danielle, because oftentimes the person who cheated says, I'm good. I'm straight. You're the one who needs help, because they're the ones that are emotionally bleeding. They're the ones who are trapped in negative memories. They're the ones who are dealing with triggers. They're the ones who are hypervigilant, and they're going through obvious pain. And I think that the biggest tragedy is the unfaithful person thinking that they're fine. I say this all the time. What the unfaithful partner did caused pain, hurt, and brokenness in the betrayed spouse. But the fact of the matter is, there had to be some pain, hurt, and brokenness in the unfaithful person in the first place to cause them to do it. They did this out of their brokenness. They did this out of their pain. And so each of them deserve a healing and recovery process. Because if the unfaithful person doesn't feel like they need therapy and they're just good because they made a decision to never do it again, then
Yeah.
they're not being self-aware of their internal patterns, their temptations, their vulnerabilities, their idiosyncrasies, their mindsets, all of the things that caused it to happen in the first place. And
Mhm.
what we find is that people make these vows and declarations about what they'll never do. And when a person is so overly confident about the fact that they'll never cheat again, you can't trust it. It has been said that every unfaithful partner should have a healthy suspicion of the possibility of it happening again. And that's why it's important to have accountability and boundaries and people in place to guide you through a process. Because if you've done it before, yeah, you can do it again. And
And
when you,
like, let me just say this, babe. I just think, you're saying, what do I do? Because everything that Hassani is saying is probably what you're living every single day. But what you need to do is stop tolerating. And, it's like, it would be great if you would just call us, because it's hard to know, to give you a path or a course of action to take without understanding how you are operating in the relationship. Some people just naturally operate in an avoidant state. And so, you know what? You don't know what to do. So you're just going to avoid it. Or if you are hyper vigilant, then you might be operating at a very, aggressive and confrontational state. So there's always confrontation. And this person is basically blaming you for your aggression and saying, you're the problem. You're always angry. It's because of the betrayal. And so we've got to stop tolerating other people's behaviors. We've got to start to implement boundaries that we will not allow people to cross, that protect our hearts, our minds, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. We must do that. And a lot of people struggle with doing it or are afraid of it because they feel like, oh my God, well, then I'll be even more isolated if I do these things. Yes, for a time. But what we've noticed is that when we change the way that we act, everything else on the outside of us is forced to change. If I show up differently today, the environment is different and it has to respond to my difference. And we don't really understand how powerful we are and how much authority we have when we step into it and actually exact some change. So reach out, because this is what we do. And we do it not to destroy relationships, but to help them heal. And oftentimes, all it takes is for one person to rise up and do something different to get the attention that is needed for people to recognize, oh, you know what? I thought I had a good thing with my manipulation and distortion of truth and all the things that I was doing. But now that this person is on to me and operating differently, I'm seeing that if I don't get it together, I'm going to be left all alone with my web of lies. And most people don't need that. It's a codependent relationship that you're dealing with here. And so if you remove yourself from the equation, change happens. The last couple of things I just want to make sure we point out before we wrap up is that, when we do not, or when we continue rather to justify, it definitely undermines the healing that takes place. And that's some of what you're talking about and what you're experiencing. If the fear is understated, right, then there's this missing piece, this component that retards the rebuilding of the relationship. I cannot build a relationship that is full of trust if everything has been justified. I can't step into that because now my emotions are at risk. Okay. And then the last thing is it destroys safety. Instead of remorse, the betrayed hears reasons, and the reasons just don't heal those wounds. So we have to give up our reasons. We have to acknowledge, hey, I messed up and there was no justification. The relationships that heal the fastest and that bounce back the best are those that literally give it up. They give up all their rights to be right. They acknowledge that they've messed up big. It hits ego hard, but it brings them down to a humbled state. When you're humbled, you're empty. You're empty of all the ego. And now when you're empty, we can put things into you that'll build you up the way that you were supposed to be in the first place, so that you can support a marriage that is closed, supported, honest, transparent, and healthy.
If this is making sense and you're realizing, wow, this is a lot deeper, more complex than what I realized, and I've been attempting to heal by myself on my own or with my spouse by watching videos and reading books, and you realize it's not enough, reach out to us at couplesacademy.org. Set up a discovery call. Let's have a conversation. Let's figure out how we can do this. You can even reach out to me at this particular number right here. Now, the question was clarified, and we're going to end with this. The question was clarified, and it was, in essence, do men work with Hassani and women work with Danielle? Do we keep it separate, or is it all together? Yes, it is all of the above, right? So we believe in your marital recovery, and that's when we work together with you as a couple, but we also believe in your individual recovery process. So I have a program called Irreplaceable Husbands, and it's for the husbands, okay? So whether you are the offender or the offended, if you're the unfaithful one or the betrayed, both of them are in that group. And it's so beneficial when you have both in the group, because clarity and understanding and a pathway for healing is done in that process. Danielle has a group called Unearthed, okay? And it's for the wives, it's for the women. And Danielle, quickly, you want to share something, 30 seconds about that?
I mean, first of all, we have classes starting in September. They run 12 weeks. And yes, both the betrayed and the betrayer are in the same group. And it is incredibly beneficial for people who have, no relationship to each other to actually be able to hear and understand what happened. But we work on dealing or healing the person from the inside out, right? So the decisions that you make are not usually external, they're internal. And you don't necessarily know why you do what you do. How do I keep doing this? Why do I keep going back? You feel like you're just broken. And there's some truth to that. So we work from the inside out, healing you from past traumas, helping you recognize, let go, and release, and actually helping you to begin to build a version of yourself that you want to be. So we both do that. It's a different process for the husbands and the wives because we are created differently. Women hold emotions differently than men hold emotions. But after those programs, or during, it could be during, we also work with the couples together. So we do individual counseling for the wife and the husband, and then we do marriage counseling for the couple. And that has been literally breakthrough for many of our couples to have it coming from all three angles, supporting the marriage and supporting the individual.
And if you're wondering, well, how do I get in touch with you? You see that, couplesacademy.org, 678-200-8996. But also in the description of this video, there are links to the website, links to the programs that we're talking about, Irreplaceable Husbands and the Unearthed program. We do our private marriage intensive, which is probably our flagship program that the majority of our clients who come through us do. It is a 3-day intensive, minimum 3 days, where we really go through a transformational process when we're in sessions, breaking things down, healing things, restoring things. So I encourage you to go to the website to find out more about that. We're just going to end with a short little video, 30 seconds, explaining some of these services. And I hope you got something out of today's conversation. Man, we went an hour. That wasn't, the plan, but when it's good, you got to keep going till you get it all out. So love you guys. Thanks for tuning in. Take a look at this.